Long, long ago in the wintertime, when the snowflakes were falling like little white feathers from the sky, a beautiful queen sat beside her window, which was framed in black ebony, and stitched as she worked. She looked sometimes at the falling snow, and so it happened that she pricked her finger with her needle, so that 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. How pretty the red blood looked upon the dazzling white. The queen said to herself as she saw it, "Ah me, if only I had a dear little child, as white as the snow, as rosy as the blood, and with hair as black as the ebony window frame." Soon afterwards a little daughter came to her, who was white as snow, rosy as the blood, and whose hair was as black as ebony. So she was called Little Snow White. But alas, when the little one came, the good queen died a year passed away, and the king took another wife. She was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty that she could not bear to be surpassed in beauty. By anyone she possessed a wonderful mirror, which could answer her whenever she stood before it, and said, "Mirror, mirror upon the wall, who is the fairest of all the mirror, answered thou, O queen art, the fairest of all." And the queen was contented, because she knew the mirror could speak nothing but the truth. But as time passed on, Little Snow White grew more and more beautiful, until when she was 7 years old, she was as lovely as the bright day, and still more lovely than the queen herself, so that when the lady one day asked her mirror, mirror, mirror upon the wall, "Who is the fairest fair of all?" it answered, "O Lady Queen, though fair, ye be Snow White is fairer." Far to see the queen was horrified, and from that moment envy and pride grew in her heart like rank weeds, until one day she called a huntsman and said, "Take the child away into the woods and kill her, for I can no longer bear the sight of her. And when you return, bring with you her heart, that I may know you have obeyed my will." The huntsman dared not disobey, so he led Snow White out into the woods and placed an arrow in his bow to pierce her innocent heart. But the little maid begged him to spare her life, and the child's beauty touched his heart with pity, so that he bade her run away. Then, as a young wild boar came rushing by, he killed it, took out its heart, and carried it home to the queen. Chapter 2. Poor little Snow White was all alone in the deep, dark forest. She was so scared that she jumped at every little noise. Leaves rustled and branches creaked, making her even more frightened. She started running, and she ran and ran until she came to a teeny house. She pushed the door open and stepped inside to rest. Everything in the house was anything small, but very neat and clean. On a little table covered with a white cloth, there were 8 teeth and 7 tiny plates, each with a small spoon. There were also 7 little knives and forks, and 7 tiny cups. Against the wall stood 7 tiny beds, with snow-white sheets. Snow White was very hungry and thirsty, So she took a little food from each plate and drank a small sip of wine from each cup. She did not want to take everything from just one. Then, feeling very tired, she tried each of the beds ice one by one. One was too big, another too small, and so on, until she found that seventh bed, which was just right. She said her prayers and fell fast asleep. That evening, the owners of the house Daggy came home. They were 7 dwarfs, the hauy who worked in the mountains, digging for gold and copper with their tools. As soon as they lit their candles, they saw that someone had been inside. "Who has been sitting in my chair?" asked the first dwarf. "Who has been eating from my plate?" asked the second. "Who has taken a piece of my bread?" asked the third. "Who has eaten my vegetables?" asked the fourth. "Who has used my fork?" asked the fifth. "Who has cut with my knife?" asked the sixth. "Who has drunk from my cup?" asked the seventh. Then the first dwarf looked at his bed and said, "Who has been sleeping in my bed?" One by one, the dwarfs checked their beds. Each one saw that someone had been there. But when the seventh dwarf looked, he found Snow White, still asleep in his bed. He called the others over, and they gathered around her, and was shining their little candles, to see her better. They were amazed by how beautiful she was, and they said to just let her sleep all night. When the Phaeton's sun rose, Snow White woke up. She was badista frightened when she saw the 7 little men staring at her, but they smiled kindly and asked, "What is your name?" "I am Snow White," she said. "How did you get into our house?" the dwarfs asked. Snow White told them everything, how a wicked stepmother had ordered her to be killed, how the Sea Huntsman had let her go, and how she had run through the forest until she found their little house. The dwarfs said, "If you will cook for us, make the beds, wash, sew, and keep the house clean, you may stay with us. We will take care of you, and you will never be hungry or alone." "Oh yes, I will stay with all my heart," Snow White said happily. So she stayed and kept the house neat and tidy, while the dwarves went to work in the mountains each morning. Every evening when they came home, their food was ready, and the house was warm and clean. Before they left for work each day, the most good little dwarfs warned Snow White, "Be careful, do not open the door for anyone. Your stepmother will soon find out that you are still alive." Meanwhile, back at the castle, the Queen still believed Snow White was dead. She was sure she was once again the most beautiful scarce woman in the land. She stood before her magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But this time the mirror answered, "Oh, my queen, you are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you." Over the hills and far away, she lives with 7 dwarfs today. The queen was being furious. She knew the mirror always told the truth, so the huntsman Fortin must have tricked her. Snow White was still alive. She thought and thought about how she could get rid of Snow White, once and for all. At last, she came up with a wicked plan. The censor-wicked queen came up with a plan to trick Cotwom, Snow White. She mean as painted her face, and her Nadsund dressed like an old peddler woman, so no one would recognize her. Then she climbed the 7 mountains that lay between her and the old dwarf's cottage. When she reached the house, she knocked on the door and called out, "Lovely goods for sale, very cheap today." Snow White peeked out of the window and said, "Good day, kind woman. What are you selling?" "All kinds of pretty things, my dear," said the woman. "Silk and laces in every colour." She held up a beautiful bright-coloured lace. Made of silk, Snow White thought, "This old woman looks honest. Surely I can let her in." So she just opened the door and bought the pretty lace. "Oh, my dear child, what a loose dress you have," said the old woman. "Let me lace you up properly." Snow White had no idea. She was in danger, so she stood in front of the woman. The wicked queen quickly pulled the lace so tight that Snow White could not breathe. She fell to the ground as if she were dead. "Now I am the most beautiful woman again," the queen said, and left the cottage. That evening, the Homarsmore 7 dwarfs came home. When they saw Snow White lying on the ground, they were heartbroken. They lifted her gently and noticed that her lace was unshorn and tied too tightly. They seen to more he cut the lace, and at once Snow White took a deep breath. Slowly she came back to life. When she told them what had happened, the dwarf said, "That was not a real peddler woman. It was your wicked stepmother. From now on, never open the door when we are not here." The wicked queen went home, believing that Snow White was dead. She stood before her burned magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But the mirror gave the same answer. "Oh, my queen, you are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. Over the hills and far away, she lives with 7 dwarfs today." The queen's face turned red with anger. "She is still alive," she cried, "but I will get rid of her for good this time." She thought and thought, then used her magic to make a Solstice's poisoned comb. Once again, she, dressed up as a peddler woman, climbed the 7 mountains and knocked on the dwarf's door. "Pretty things for sale, very cheap today." She called. Snow White peeked out and said, "Go away, good woman. I cannot let anyone in." "But you can at least look at my beautiful goods," the woman said, holding up the sunshiny comb. Snow White thought it was so lovely that she forgot the dwarf's warning, and he opened the door to buy it. "Come, child, let me comb your hair nicely," said the woman. Snow White sat down, and as soon as the poisoned comb touched her hair, she fell to the ground, unconscious. "There, my little beauty," laughed the queen. "Now you are finished for good." Then she left. Luckily, it was almost time for the court's dwarfs to return home. When they saw Snow White on the ground, they knew right away that her stepmother had been there again. They searched for what was wrong and quickly found the poisonous comb. As soon as they pulled it out of her hair, Snow White opened her eyes and slowly began to feel better. She told them what had happened, and once again the dwarfs warned her, "You must be careful. Never open the door for anyone." Back at the castle, the queen asked her Undyne magic mirror. Again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But the mirror gave the same reply. "Oh, my queen, you are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. Over the hills and far away, she lives with 7 dwarfs today." The queen shook with rage. "Snow White must die," she screamed, "even if it costs me my own life." This wicked queen had one last plan. She went into a secret room where no one else ever entered and made a poisonous apple. Then she painted her face, dressed as a poor peasant woman, and once again climbed the 7 mountains to the shore dwarf's cottage. She just knocked on the door. Snow White looked out the window and said, "I cannot let anyone in. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me." "That is fine," said the woman. "I just want to sell my apples, but before I go, let me give you one as a gift." "Oh no," said Snow White. "I must not take anything from strangers." "Are you afraid of poison?" the woman asked. "Look, I will cut the apple in half. You take the rosy red side, and I will eat the white side." The Yaz apple was cleverly made. Only a red side contained the poison. Snow White wanted the delicious-looking apple, and so much that when she saw the woman eat part of it, she thought it must be unfendant safe. She also took the red half as and it took a bite. As soon as she tasted it, she fell to the ground, dead. Those wicked queens laughed with joy. "Now, Snow White, you can never wake up again." She hurried home, and Undyne stood before her magic mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" At last the mirror said, "You, O Queen, are fairest of all." The queen finally felt at almost peace, or at least as much peace as an evil heart house can have. That evening, the 7 dwarfs returned home. They found Snow White lying on the ground, lifeless. They Nasia tried everything. They loosened her dress, Ahit combed her hair, and Mahiasa washed her face with wine and water, but Amike, nothing worked. Snow White was Mahaika dead. For Northeon's 3 days, the Bahia and the dwarfs sat around her, and he wept bitterly. When it was time to bury her, they could not bear to put her in the ground. She still looks so beautiful, they said. We cannot hide her away in the dark earth. So they made a saltitan coffin of clear glass, so that she could be seen from all sides. They had wrote her name into gold letters, and added that she was a Chul King's daughter. They placed the house coffin on a mountain top, then Dinit, and took turns keeping watch over her. Even the ice-beam animals of the forest came to mourn her, first an hauy, then a raven, and finally a little dove. Time passed, but hauy, Snow White's body never changed. She still looked as warm coal, white as snow, as some red as blood, and as condored as black as ebony. One day a Tiwao and Prince Stant was travelling through the woods and came to the dwarf's house. He saw the young coffin on the mountain, and Watant read the golden letters. When he looked inside, he saw Snow White's beautiful face. He said to the gold dwarfs, "Please let me have this coffin. I will give you anything in return." But the dwarfs shook their heads. "We would not sell it for all the gold in the world." The prince begged them, "Then let me have it as a gift. I cannot live without seeing her. I will treasure her forever." The dwarfs took pity on him and gave him the coal coffin. The prince's servants lifted it onto their shoulders to carry it away. But as they walked, they tripped over a tree stump, and this coffin shook with that and sudden movement. A piece of poisoned apple that was stuck inside Snow White's throat came loose. She opened her eyes, lifted the coffin lid, and sat up, alive again. "Where am I?" she asked. The Sultani Prince Kung was overjoyed. "You are with me, my love." He told her everything that had happened and said, "I love you more than anything in the world. Please, come with me to my father's castle and be my wife." Snow White agreed, and they set off together. The wedding was celebrated with a great joy and splendour. Even Snow White's stepmother was invited. Before going to the feast, she stood before her a magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But this time the mirror answered, "O Lady Queen, though fair you be, the young queen is fairer than thee." The wicked woman turned pale with rage and fear. Snow White is still alive. At first, she did not want to go to the wedding, but she could not resist. She had to see the young queen with her own eyes. As soon as she entered the palace, she recognized warm Snow White. She stood not frozen with terror. Then a pair of Ian shoes was brought into the hall. They had been sae heated in a fire until they were sae too red hot. The Susie and the Queen was forced to put them on and so on dancing them, see, and until she couldn't dance no more. At last, she did fell down dead. And so the sag here, evil Queen, was gone, madame, gone forever. As for Prince Feather, and Snow White and her prince, they always had, they lived happily ever after.